So we've wrote the perfect function, it does all we want, but how can we communicate to the user, apart from the help files or readme, actually how to use it, what is allowed, what is required, what is optional, or maybe can they actually pipe anything to this? Well, that's where PowerShell parameters and the arguments come in action, so let's have a look. Hello everyone, Kamil here with another PowerShell video. And yeah, as I said on the intro, that we can have a PowerShell function with set of parameters, and that we can enrich the parameters and overall experience with the attributes for them. And by saying that, the PowerShell parameters really serve two purposes. For one, it tells the user how to possibly use it, because obviously they will know that this is the function and I need to pass in such parameters and such are optional and etc. etc. On the other end, if anyone will ever look at your code, they will know what your expectations were. In other words, it allows you as the developer to control really what comes into your application. So it really helps us on both ends. And I have a few examples for today, few PowerShell files. So if you're interested, check the description because there will be a link to GitHub where you can go and grab this code, or just have a watch around as I'm going through and explain it. It's up to you. I just personally like to have a files around. So let's have a look what we have before I actually get into examples. So what I've prepared for today, I will kind of came with the idea that I'll be mimicking the calls to the API or database. That is, I ask for information and I get that information back. And for that, for one, I needed some kind of data file or whatever. And something what is very easy to do is pretty much having a PSD1 file, which PSD1 file is really a hash table of things. So what we have pretty much a hash table of users with things like ID, first name, surname, whether they're active or not, and region. And obviously, yeah, they have their ID. So then I'll be able to do certain queries or filters as if I was query a API or database. So let's have a look what we have for the first. So because there were quite a few things, I actually created files, because if I was to write all of this as we on the screen, we will burn quite a lot of time for that, and I don't think it's really necessary when you can actually grab the code yourself and test it. And that way. But anyways, so here's our starting point. We have a single function called getPerson, and if you haven't written functions yet, have a look at my previous video where actually I explained how to convert a PowerShell script into a function. So we have this kind of covered. So that's where I imagine we'll be starting off. So pretty much we're starting with a function which is called getPerson, and we're making this an advanced function but specifying this. This pretty much, if you haven't heard about commanded bindings, commanded binding tells PowerShell that this is in fact an advanced function and, for example, allows us to do things like verbose or other command parameters. So it just happens there. I don't know really why it's not enabled by default. I mean, when I've been reading about this, that was due to memory reasons, but in the days when web browser takes 8 gigs of RAM, having a few hundred kilobytes of RAM taken by PowerShell function is not a big deal, I think. Then we have our bunch of parameters, but maybe before we get into parameters, let's see in the actual code. In the actual code, what we do, we create an array, or in that case, a list, yeah, a generic list. If you haven't seen the list, there's actually a whole video about arrays and array lists. This is actually the modern way of doing the list. So what we do, we specify that we're going through system collections generic list, and then the type that is being specified there, and we'll be throwing at this PowerShell custom object. So we do that, and I'll specify create me a new one. Yeah. Then I import the file I just showed you, so that'll be working as our API or database, or however, and I just extract the users bit out of it. So I just don't need to keep typing this every time. And there's just a bunch of things like, for example, to filter. So by default, you usually quite often don't get inactive accounts, sometimes you, sometimes do not. So we have include inactive is present. And this one is actually probably first interesting thing we can say. It is a type of switch. Switch is, I think, special to PowerShell. I might be wrong, but pretty much is like a bool. But the difference is with switch, we only do something like, let me run this. We only say get person, and then my values, for example, include inactive. And that will then pretty much work. So I don't need to specify things like true or false. So for example, all is another switch, and then it starts to work, and we have only 3. If I run with this one, include inactive, then we should have an inactive user. Yeah. Yes, we do. So it's very handy when you actually want to have something just on the face of true or false and explicitly say enable it. Yeah, if you used, for example, -false, this is the same thing, switch. So we have this one, then we can filter by region, and there's another really nice thing about how we pass in parameters to PowerShell, and that is we can specify PSBoundParameters .contains_key.region. And now you can say, what is the difference between having this and having, let me quickly copy this, and having something of this way. Yeah, region. So like this one, because at the moment it works perfectly fine. However, when we're actually looking for the variable, it will, and if that variable is set any time before, it will always evaluate as true. And we don't really want that when I'm passing in things to the function or to my code. So going with the root of PSBoundParameters contains key, and then the name of function is actually the way that I can be sure that actually this is what counts through the parameters of the function. Yeah, so that's why. And if you know about hash tables, you can probably already straight away tell that parameters are in fact hash table. And then we just pretty much, again, doing a filtering for this, yeah? So we are just piping this through my object. Then pretty much for whatever is left after my filters, I pipe this all to the PowerShell custom object. And since they're already in hash table, I don't need to do any conversion. Let's say if that was an API, like a real API, and that was a JSON object, I would probably do some kind of convert from JSON, then add to this. If that was database, then I'll have some sort of reader or something like that, and then actually construct PS custom object of it. And if it's something interested you'd like to see, let me know in comments, because certainly I could, well, do a video about that, how to retrieve data, say from database, or how to talk to database from PowerShell without any modules. Then we again checking for the key, whether we want to all. If you want all, then we just grab all of them. We can ask for a specific user with ID, and then we can something in here. So if I ask for surname, then we can, and this actually comes from the, I was deconstructing the main function, then we can also ask for the first name. And now in the current form, so I have all these filters and the functions, and now the problem is, if the user was to come and do this, it doesn't really tell them, because everything is optional, nothing is mandatory, so they don't really know what to do about that. Yeah, they can just think like, oh, we just go and, you know, yeah. So for example, what if I ask for person with ID, I don't know, 4? Well, it doesn't work. Can I ask for include inactive? Yes, I can. What about I ask, for example, ID 2? This one works because that person is active. Yeah. What if I try to do something like this? Okay, this works in this example, but what if we do ID 3? Then it works, but my surname doesn't work, and it shouldn't really work because the ID is different. So I guess you having an idea where the problem is, and the problem is we can mix and match things. So one of the, well, that's kind of where we left it, so that's why I'm starting with this parameter here, is parameter mandatory. So if I, for example, take an ID that I wanted a mandatory parameter, and we specify the attribute, yeah, we call that bit an attribute for the parameter, with opening the square bracket parameter and then its values. And we can pretty much, there's quite a few output. I won't tell you all of them because there's plenty, but I'll tell you the ones that actually are really used on quite regular basis. So what mandatory says, pretty much it will enforce me to use this code. So if I, let's say, for example, now just run get person, I'm being prompt for ID, so I need to provide it. Yeah. If on the other hand, I will do ID like straight away, it will work. If, for example, I will do other parameter, and I specify ID, it also will prompt me. But there's a problem here, because what if I have or want to have a couple of mandatory parameters, yeah? And that couple mandatory parameters, they are not really compatible with each other. Well, we have a problem, and to resolve that problem, we have something actually called parameter set names. So let's move on to the next slide. And parameter set name, it is what allows us to group parameters in the groups. So I can only pick one parameters from the certain group, and I cannot pick from the another. And for this, I needed to make a few changes. So for most of the parameters, I specified a set name. A set name is actually what groups them. Okay, so now we have, for example, third name and first name is the one group of called by name. Then we have ID called by ID. We have a all, specify all, and include, inactive, and rigid. They don't have any parameters. They can be, in other words, used across all the other parameters. I've also, because we now have this level of separation, I slightly changed this code at this point, and I can specify that PowerShell command-led parameter set name is all. Yeah, so I don't need to do filtering on the level of parameter name of value. I can do actually on the parameter set. So for example, here we've got parameter set name is by name, and I can just worry about things like first name or not, or first name, surnames. So I can group them. And at the very top, I specified that the default parameter set name, yeah, line number 2, is all. So in other words, if I will not pick any parameter from any of these groups, it will default to all, which I think kind of makes sense. So let's load it. There's also one more difference between this approach and the previous one, and that is if I go for help, get person, then we can see that I have one group where it's all and include inactive and region and common parameters, and that comes from command-led binding. I have another one with surname and first name, and you see surname is mandatory in this example, therefore it is not in square brackets. Yeah, square brackets indicates it's optional, lack of it indicates it is mandatory. And same with ID. So already, just by doing this, already help is coming to help. Okay, so let's try, for example, now to run it with simply get person, and we can see it defaults to the all, yeah, and I can still do something like include inactive, so it still achieves all our users. But what if, for example, now I will go after get person, and I like to specify number 2 for ID. Yeah, it works. And what if I now try to do this? It complains that, yeah, actually it doesn't, I don't know what you want me to do. And actually I'm a bit surprised in this new PowerShell, because in previous one I'm certain it wouldn't allow me to even to pick it up. If I, let's say, go Control Spacebar, it's not there. You can see include inactive is just not there. So certainly something changed, but at least it doesn't allow me to run it. Yeah. On the other hand, if I now will go and pick, for example, surname is Smith, it works. And let's say for one I pick, I don't know, first name John, it only allows me to fit it. So I have this level of control of actually what you can run and on what combination you can run. You can even, although I don't have this example here, but you can, for example, specify that one parameter belongs to multiple parameter sets, and it could be then mandatory or not, but just something you're aware of if you need to combine a bit more. Okay, so let's move on to the next example, example number 3, and that is a position. So we can pretty much specify what we were using so far with using a parameters called by the name. We called something called name parameters. Yeah, and this is cool, but for example, when you were using something like, for example, get content, you probably straight away went and picked the file. Yeah, just you went and provided a path. And what you done in that case, you did in fact use a position parameter. So when a developer can foresee that you'll be using something very often, they can just specify that it's a position. Yeah, and we specify that, but specify another attribute called position and then with number 1. Yeah, and now you can probably straight away see I have 1, 2, and then I have 1. And why is that? Well, we are in different parameter set names, so I could do that. And I have also specified different types. Yeah, this is text, this is integer. So how does this work? If I will go now get person and I specify Smith, it just does it, yeah? And so Smith is 1 and the first name is position 2. So I can, for example, specify I want Ellen and it automatically does it for me, yeah? And the other way, if I let's say get person number 3, and in fact gives me person number 3. So PowerShell does resolve that for me. One thing with the named parameters, position parameters, you need to, when you start using them, you need to provide them in the order as you want. You cannot mix and match them. So just something you can, however, do something like that. So I can specify Smith, and I can obviously specify other parameter. So that will fly. But that's effectively how you add position. So you can make execution of your code faster. Okay, now this is probably something, at least I was very excited when I learned how to do that. And it is an attribute called value from pipeline. So literally we do this by saying value from pipeline. And I've done this in this case for surname and ID. So obviously we are all familiar with doing pipeline by now. And how does it work? Pretty much I have a, and then again, PowerShell will pretty much use this type coming in here to specify which parameter it will come in, yeah? So let's have a look. Number 1, get person. And we have person number 1. Number 3, we have a person, yeah? Or I can do the other way. What was that other surname I have? Oliver. So if I go Oliver, get person, and that's how my pipeline works. That's literally all it is to it. I just tell it, you can take it on that type, and then you work on that type, or this type. There's also value from pipeline via parameter name, via property name, and pretty much you can use it when you don't know what the type is incoming, but you know that it's, for example, computer name from the other commandlet, and you can just pretty much have it that via property name, you match that name over there, and it will PowerShell just match it by the property name. So that's kind of how it works. Yeah, very little trick and made me very happy when I've learned it. Anyways, what else we can do? We have, for example, validation, and there is quite a few of validation parameters. And what I have for today, we have that we're checking that something is not null or empty. Yeah, for example, if somebody is not passing me a empty string, or we can specify a range. So range is pretty much you can only this number is valid from this to that number. So when we have an example like here, I can pick the first one, last one, and you can only allow to punch in values for that range. And I also have a set, and set is very cool because people actually are allowed only to pick any values from here, but they can also tab it through. So maybe before I run it, let's have a look how it works now. So for example, get person, surname is Smith, first name, empty string. It just works, yeah? And I cannot have somebody with no first name, at least I would imagine I can't. So therefore, it should fail. Or get person with ID of, I don't know. Also, it doesn't complain, but we don't really know if it's there or not. And with the region, yeah? So get person, and region is what we have. Yes, okay, UK. Also, we don't know, is it there at all or not? So let's see how this will different now. Run it. See it. So get person. And PowerShell straight away complains that it cannot validate my first name because it's empty and I do not allow empty strings, yeah? It's not mandatory, because if something is mandatory, then by default it will not allow you to pass in an empty string. but it's not mandatory, so, well, it doesn't know. So that's how we can tell it. Or we have a validate range. So now let's see get person ID 5. Also says 5, but also it says that it actually maximum is 4. Yeah, so it also tells me actually already tells me what is the highest value, which is nice. And the last one, the region, which I think is the nicest out of them, because I can just tap through them, yeah? EU, U, and Z, US. It just helped me if I try something what is not available. And again, it complains, is not there, you can use that. However, that's the valid values. Yeah, we don't need to write help. I mean, I don't say you shouldn't write help or don't write help, but we have just all these built-in mechanics in PowerShell that allows us to much better control. And the last one is an alias. So when you are pretty much, so there are two cases. One is when you wrote a code and then, it's working and you realized actually there is a better name for it, a common name or something that everyone uses. But, it's already, you don't know if your code will break something, you can add an alias. So pretty much both names will be valid. And the other way is when I mention the value from pipeline via property name, when something is incoming and that name, you don't have that parameter, you can actually add alias and the PowerShell will match your parameter over that alias. So let's have a look. For example, get person, second name, and you see it just works. And get person, given name, actually not given name. I mean, we can do second name this and given name. Yep, so it works exactly the same as it was before. And let's just have a look how is looking our help now, although I didn't punch in a single value of help. So obviously we have all of this, but for example, we can now have something like position, is it named or not, is it required or not, so we have a bit more, whoever is expecting the pipeline input, the parameter set name, yeah, and we have any aliases, and we also have a couple of others which are a bit more advanced topics. But for example, first name, and we see parameter set name is this, alias is this. We have, for example, ID. Now look, accept pipeline input true by value. So literally, whether somebody is willing to read this or read that, we can certainly help them, yeah? And we just literally wrote code. We didn't write any documentation, and our code is kind of self-documenting itself. Also, look, another benefit, because we accepting a string and an integer, PowerShell already picked it up for us. Cool. That will be it, but as I mentioned, there are many more, but those ones are the ones I've used most often. So as you can see, very little effort on your end and much gain for both your users and anyone else who would be trying to reuse your code, because we're telling them literally how to use it and also the way how the code flows through your application. So I hope you find it useful. I am actually now this is all preparing us to actually build a module. So when we have multiple functions working as the one, and I think in the long term, I will actually go through the way how to build it with Azure pipelines or GitHub Actions. I mean, I'm more familiar with Azure pipelines, to be honest, but I might give a shot to GitHub. So if you'll be interested in any, say, no strict PowerShell topics, do let me know. And obviously do let me know if you're interested in any PowerShell strict topics, because there is a lot to learn. There's a lot of depth to PowerShell that is quite often missed because it's been seen like a simple scripting language, and clearly it's not. But anyways, have a great day, and I see you on the next video. Bye bye. Great. So as you can see, very little effort on your end and much gain for both your users and anyone else who will be trying to reuse your code, because we're telling them literally how to use it and also the way how the code flows through your application. So I hope you found it useful. I am actually now this is all preparing us to actually build a module. So when we have multiple functions working as the one, and I think in the long term, I will actually go through the way how to build it with Azure pipelines or GitHub Actions. I mean, I'm more familiar with Azure pipelines, to be honest, but I might give a shot to GitHub. So if you'll be interested in any, say, no strict PowerShell topics, do let me know. And obviously do let me know if you're interested in any PowerShell strict topics, because there is a lot to learn. There's a lot of depth to PowerShell that is quite often missed, because it's been seen like a simple scripting language, and clearly it's not. But anyways, have a great day, and I see you on the next video. Bye bye.